I invite you to listen to my new dramatic story about a military man's honor, betrayal, and righteous retribution on the Purple Heart Stories channel. I'm sure you won't be disappointed, and support with a like and subscription if you enjoy it. Hero Auction. Chapter 1: Auction of Betrayal. My name is Declan Shaw. I'm 42 years old, and my wife is selling my military medals to strangers in our living room. Just 5 years ago, I commanded an elite special forces unit. Today, I'm a plumber with a damaged spine and constant pain as my only faithful companion. Emily is 35. She always dreamed of a career as a financial analyst but ended up as a caretaker to a broken husband. So perhaps there's a peculiar justice in what's happening in my house right now. Only the man with the military bearing examining photos from my last operation doesn't know one thing. I may be broken, but I'm far from harmless. Return home. Today began with a sewage pipe clogged with condoms and drugs at the Sunset Motel. The owner, a Vietnamese man with squinting eyes, danced around me repeating, "Quick, quick, room needed for clients." I was digging through excrement for $12 an hour, though exactly 5 years ago at this same time, I was leading my team through the basements of a school seized by terrorists. Funny how life changes. When I pulled up to our house in a quiet suburb, a one-story ranch with perfectly trimmed lawn that Emily called our little piece of the American dream, the street was lined with expensive cars. A black Mercedes, a couple of BMWs, a Cadillac Escalade with diplomatic plates. I thought one of the neighbors was throwing a party. The idea that all these vehicles might be connected to my house didn't even cross my mind. The key turned in the lock, and I was greeted by music, something classical. Emily always preferred Vivaldi when she wanted to make an impression. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of canapés and champagne. I froze in the hallway, still in my work overalls with a rust stain on the knee and Ray's plumbing services on the chest pocket. Ray had hired me as an old friend when my military pension turned out to be less than the interest on loans for 4 spine surgeries. From the living room came laughter and the clinking of glasses, and Emily's voice, high, ringing, with that special intonation she reserved for important clients in her past life as a financial consultant. That life which I destroyed when I returned home on a stretcher with titanium plates instead of 3 vertebrae. And here, she was saying, her words resonating like a taut string, is a collector's photograph. The Maltaman Operation 2019. Note the military censorship mark in the corner. Starting price, $500. I stepped into the living room and froze. Our modest bright room with its worn sofa and bookshelves had been transformed into an impromptu exhibition hall. Enlarged photographs of my operations hung on the walls, some of them marked top secret. My awards lay in glass cases, the Purple Heart, the Silver Star, the Medal of Honor. And in the center of the room, holding a photograph where I, covered in blood and dust, was carrying a child from a burning building, stood Emily. She looked stunning, black cocktail dress, perfect styling, magazine cover makeup. I hadn't seen her like this for almost 3 years. Around her crowded people in expensive suits, at least a dozen, examining my life, categorized and priced. And here he is, our greatest treasure, a living legend, Emily announced, not looking in my direction. She raised a glass of champagne and smiled at the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, the auction continues. Silence fell. All heads turned toward me. I felt the left side of my body going numb, a sure sign that the damaged nerve was being pinched again. The doctor said it happens due to stress. He didn't explain what to do if the cause of stress was your own wife selling your life piece by piece. Humiliation of a hero. Declan, darling. Emily switched to the voice of a caring spouse so smoothly, as if she had shifted a gear lever. Meet our guests. They've heard so much about you. She approached and took my arm, like a couple at a reception. I felt the coldness of her fingers through the fabric of my work overalls. Gentlemen, allow me to present Captain Declan Shaw, hero of Operation Red Shield, holder of the highest awards. Her voice sounded as if she were presenting a new investment product. My personal charity project for the past 5 years. Someone among the guests laughed quietly. Emily smiled, showing perfect teeth we couldn't afford on my pension. Don't be shy about asking questions. After all, you're paying for an authentic experience. I scanned the room, an old habit of assessing the situation. 12 guests, all polished, well off. One man in his 50s with a military bearing, which even an expensive suit couldn't hide, stood out particularly. He was slightly apart, carefully studying a folder of documents on Operation Red Shield, the very one for which I received the highest award and titanium plates in my spine. "Mrs. Shaw," spoke up a portly man with the sleek face of a banker, "I'm prepared to offer $3,000 for a personal dinner with the hero. My daughter is entering the military academy. It would be an honor for her to hear about real combat experience." "5,000, interrupted a woman in thin-framed glasses, "for a tour of the sites of military glory with commentary from a participant." I felt myself growing more numb, but not from the pinched nerve now. Emily gripped my arm tighter, feeling the tension in my muscles. The fingers of my right hand involuntarily clenched into a combat grip, an instinct developed through years of training. Strangle an opponent in 7 seconds if you compress the carotid artery at the right angle. "Don't worry," Emily caught my gaze and smiled at the guests. "He's completely tame. The spinal injury made him more compliant." She said this in the same tone she used when telling the doctor about my urination problems in the first months after the injury. The man with the military bearing finally tore himself away from the document folder and came closer. He moved like a predator, economically, assessing the space and calculating options. I'd seen guys like him in special units, former operatives who had moved to the private sector, dangerous people with blurred moral boundaries. "Gregory Caldwell," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "Summit Security. I've heard about your exploits, Captain Shaw." I didn't shake the offered hand. Something in his eyes, cold, evaluating, caused an instinctive rejection. He looked at me like an asset to be acquired or neutralized. "Operation Red Shield is particularly interesting," he continued, undeterred. "Your decision to return to the east wing of the school against direct orders intrigues me. What made you risk your life for one hostage when you had already saved dozens?" The question was too precise, too professional. It wasn't the idle curiosity of a wealthy collector of war stories. He knew details that hadn't made it to the press, and he was interested in exactly that part of the operation about which I had been ordered to remain silent. "Mrs. Shaw," Caldwell shifted his gaze to my wife, as if I were an inanimate object, "I'm raising the bid to 10,000 for an exclusive interview with your husband about the east wing of the school in Qatar. In private, of course." Emily beamed, her fingers on my forearm tightening even more. "Gentlemen, we have a new leader in the bidding." Confrontation. I waited until the guests turned their attention to new lots. Emily was now displaying my diary from Afghanistan, which I had thought was lost, and quietly said, "We need to talk now." She nodded with a professional smile. With the same motion, she had agreed to accompany me to the bathroom in the first months after the injury, when I couldn't manage the catheter on my own. "Gregory, would you be so kind as to show our guests the collection of photographs from the secret operation in Yemen? There are several exclusive shots there that aren't even in the military archives." We went to the kitchen. Emily moved like a dancer, gracefully and perfectly calculating each step. I limped behind, feeling my left leg going numb. The pinched nerve was making itself known again. As soon as the door closed behind us, I pressed Emily against the wall. Not roughly, but enough for her to feel the strength that still remained in my crippled body. "What the hell is going on?" My voice was quiet, but it carried the same intonations with which I gave orders in combat situations. "Let me go, Declan," she answered calmly. "You're hurting me." I loosened my fingers and stepped back. She adjusted the collar of her dress and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between pity and contempt. "It's a charity auction," she said, pouring herself water from a pitcher. "A project I've been working on for the last 6 months. We're raising funds to support special operations veterans." "You're selling my medals and classified documents to strangers. What the hell, Emily?" I felt a vein pulsing at my temple. "These aren't just personal items. These are classified materials. Some of these photographs should never have left the archive." She sipped her water and looked at me over the glass. Something sharp, like a shard of ice, flashed in her eyes. "You're selling something that was never yours," I continued, lowering my voice to a whisper. "These medals don't just belong to me. They belong to the guys who didn't come back. I don't have the right to sell them, and neither do you." "Oh, how noble." Her voice grew colder. "Tell me, Declan, who paid for 4 operations on your spine when military insurance refused coverage? Who took extra shifts at the investment company to pay the bills for rehabilitation? Who cleaned up your bed when you couldn't control your bladder?" Each word hit precisely on target like a sniper's bullet. She continued, and her voice grew harsher. "For 3 years I changed your catheters and wiped your behind while you whimpered in pain. You think I dreamed of this? You think I married to be a caretaker at a boarding house for one patient?" She took a step toward me, and now her perfume, expensive, unfamiliar, filled my lungs. "Now my investments should pay off, and they will, believe me." In her eyes, I saw not only cold calculation but something else, a deep, long-standing resentment, as if I had betrayed her by returning alive but broken. "You came back from war a hero," she said more quietly, "and I remained a caretaker at an invalid's bedside. But that's over, Declan. I found a way to monetize your fame. You can't forbid me that much." Deception revealed. When the guests finally left, loaded with my medals, photographs, and personal belongings, each with a certificate of authenticity signed by my wife, I remained alone in the living room. Light patches remained on the walls where photos had been removed. The display cases gaped emptily. Only on the coffee table lay a stack of documents that no one had purchased. I picked up the top sheet. It was a contract with the Summit Security logo, Gregory Caldwell's company. I flipped through the document, feeling a growing heaviness in my chest. This wasn't just an agreement. It was consent for the use of my name, image, and military history for charitable and marketing purposes. At the bottom of the page was my signature. I had never signed this document, or had I? Emily entered the room with a glass of whiskey, my whiskey, which I bought for special occasions and couldn't afford more than once a year. $58,000, she said with satisfaction. Not bad for the first auction. "What is this?" I held up the document. "Oh, that," she waved dismissively, as if it were an unpaid electricity bill. "Just a formality. You signed these papers 2 weeks ago, refinancing our mortgage, remember?" And then I remembered. After 2 sleepless nights when the pain in my back was particularly excruciating, Emily had brought me a stack of documents. "Just sign here and here, dear. I've taken care of everything. A new loan at a lower interest rate." I hadn't even read what I was signing. I trusted her that much and was so worn out from the pain. "You tricked me," I said, and it sounded pitiful even to myself. Not an accusation, but a statement of fact. "Don't be melodramatic." Emily took a sip of whiskey. "You're a businessman. I'm just using the assets available to me. Your military glory is the only asset we have left." I turned the page and saw an addendum to the contract. A complete list of items transferred to the ownership of Summit Security, including all materials related to Operation Red Shield. "Why does Caldwell want my things?" I asked. "What's the point for a private military company?" Emily shrugged with feigned casualness, but her eyes betrayed tension. "Gregory simply wants to use your story to attract investors to his company. Nothing personal, just business. and he offered me a position as financial director. And not only that. She pronounced the last words with a special intonation, leaving no doubt about what connected her to Caldwell. "You're sleeping with him, it wasn't a question. Are you surprised?" She looked at me directly, without a trace of embarrassment. "When was the last time you touched me for something other than helping you get to the bathroom?" I was silent. The truth was that after the injury I had distanced myself from her not only physically. Along with the shrapnel that tore apart my spine, something broke inside as well. I couldn't let her see me vulnerable, pitiful. I preferred to distance myself, to retreat into my pain and memories. "You abandoned me long before I met Gregory," Emily said more quietly. "You abandoned me when you returned from war and brought only your nightmares and medals. The second you kept in a safe, and the first you shared every night." First clues. After my wife left, I began sorting through the remaining documents. Something didn't add up. I irritably noted that my painkillers together with the whiskey I'd drunk were dulling my ability to think clearly. But even in this state, I could see strange inconsistencies. The photographs and documents related to Operation Red Shield had almost completely disappeared, although only a few censorship-approved snapshots had been displayed at the auction. Gregory might have taken the rest as a bonus for his generous bid, but why? I remembered how Caldwell was particularly interested in materials about the East Wing of the captured school, the very one I returned to against direct orders. The official version stated that I heard a child's cry, a heroic impulse that cost me my spine when an explosion collapsed the ceilings. The truth was more complex. In the East Wing, I discovered not only a child but also a hiding place with a diplomatic case. I was ordered not to include information about the case in my official report. National security. All documents about this part of the operation were stored separately, under the classification top secret. And now they had disappeared. I took a small photograph from my wallet, the only one I always carried with me. A picture of my team before Operation Red Shield. 8 people in full gear, only eyes visible under balaclavas. 5 of them were already dead. Looking at the worn photograph, I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. On the shoulder of one of the terrorists, captured in the background, a logo was visible. I took a magnifying glass from the desk drawer and looked more closely. It was the sign of Summit Security, a stylized mountain with an eagle, the same logo that adorned Gregory Caldwell's business card. A private military company connected to the terrorists who seized the school in Qatar. It didn't make sense, unless the school seizure was staged. But why? What was the real purpose of the operation? I remembered the diplomatic case. The man in civilian clothes whom I found hiding in a utility room in the East Wing, the very one who was evacuated separately from the other hostages. His frightened eyes, his whisper, "They're hunting for documents, not people." Fragments of the mosaic began to form a disturbing picture. What if Summit Security had organized the school seizure as a cover for eliminating a person with compromising documents? What if my heroic return to the East Wing had disrupted their plans? This explained Caldwell's interest in my materials. He was looking for evidence of his involvement to destroy it. Beginning of the investigation. The next morning, I called Mike Donaldson, an old Army friend who now served in the Pentagon's analytical department. We hadn't spoken for over a year, and my call surprised him. "Declan, damn, haven't heard from you in ages. How's the back?" "Been better," I got straight to the point. "Mike, what do you know about Summit Security?" The pause on the other end of the line stretched out. "Why are you asking?" His voice became cautious. "Just answer, it's important." He sighed. "Officially, a major contractor for the Department of Defense, a private military company with an impeccable reputation. Unofficially, let's just say they have contracts that aren't written up in reports to Congress." "What kind of contracts?" "Declan, don't get involved in this." Mike's voice conveyed genuine concern. These guys specialize in delicate operations in third-world countries, destabilization of unfavorable governments, managed conflicts, sometimes staging terrorist acts to justify military intervention. Dirty work that the government can't do with its own hands. Qatar 5 years ago, the school. Could that have been their operation? The silence on the line became thick, palpable. "I'll call you back," Mike finally said and disconnected. He didn't call back. Instead, an hour later, an email arrived from an encrypted address. "Forget about Q and SS people who asked such questions end up in a ditch. For your own safety, back off." I returned home late in the evening, having spent the day at the public library, where I searched for any information about Summit Security and Gregory Caldwell. The picture was becoming clearer and more disturbing. The company had a reputation as cleaners. They solved delicate problems for governments and corporations. Their employees were mostly former military with connections in the intelligence community. Caldwell, before founding Summit, had served in a special CIA unit responsible for covert operations abroad. The house was quiet and empty. Emily's closets gaped emptily, her vanity was pristinely clean as if she had never been there. On the kitchen table lay a laconic note: "Sorry, this will be better for both of us." I looked at the familiar handwriting and felt a strange numbness. In 15 years of marriage, we had been through a lot. My endless deployments, her career ambitions, my injury, her sacrifices for my recovery. And it all ended with a 5-word note. My phone vibrated with an incoming message. "Unknown number. I work for Gregory. They've killed 5 witnesses to Operation Red Shield. You're next. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park by the fountain. Remember me, Alexis M., your nurse from Kandahar." Attached to the message was a photo. A young woman with penetrating eyes holding a worn photograph where she sat at the bedside of a wounded soldier. Me, with a bandaged back and IV lines protruding from both arms. I vaguely remembered her, a nurse from the field hospital in Kandahar, where I was taken after being wounded before evacuation to Germany. She was one of those who fought for my life in the first critical hours, a quiet woman with confident hands and kind eyes. I think she read to me aloud when I came to consciousness between doses of morphine. I liked her, this nurse, liked her calm competence and the absence of pity in her gaze. And now she worked for Caldwell and wanted to meet. It could be a trap, but if not, if Alexis really had access to information about what was behind Operation Red Shield and the subsequent killing of witnesses, I had to risk it. In any case, I had nothing more to lose. Emily was gone. My reputation sold at auction. My military career over. All that remained was the truth and revenge on those who had turned my life to ruins. I retrieved a hidden cache with a spare pistol and ammunition from under the floorboard in the bedroom. Cleaned the weapon, assembled a tactical first aid kit, packed necessities for surveillance into a backpack, binoculars, a voice recorder, a camera with zoom. If Summit Security was hunting me, I wasn't going to be an easy target. Before turning off the light, I looked once more at the photograph sent by Alexis. On the back of the picture was a half-erased inscription in her handwriting: "Captain Shaw, day 3 after injury. God protects heroes. We still need them." Well, tomorrow I would find out if God really does protect heroes, or if heroes are sold at auction along with their medals and then erased from history as inconvenient witnesses. Chapter 2: The Price of Truth. Deadly Meeting. I arrived at Riverside Park an hour before the appointed time. An old habit: never enter a potential contact zone without prior reconnaissance. I parked 3 blocks from the park and made a circle around the perimeter, checking possible sniper positions, evacuation routes, and blind spots of surveillance cameras. The pain in my back persistently reminded me that I was no longer the soldier I was 5 years ago, but my mind still worked like a well-oiled mechanism. Taking a position on a bench with a view of the fountain, I began to observe. An ordinary weekday morning. Young mothers with strollers, elderly couples walking dogs, office workers cutting through the park. Nothing suspicious, which was suspicious in itself. If Caldwell knew about the meeting with Alexis, his people would already be stationed here. At 10 minutes to 10, a woman appeared on the path leading to the fountain. She walked with a quick, businesslike stride, her light trench coat opening with each step to reveal a formal suit underneath. If I hadn't been waiting for Alexis, I might not have recognized her. The woman had changed significantly since she had pulled shrapnel from my back at the hospital in Kandahar. The timid nurse was gone, replaced by someone with the professional caution of an operative. The same appearance, a petite figure, chestnut hair pulled back, but anxious eyes and tense shoulders spoke of constant readiness for danger. She sat on the opposite side of the fountain. The sound of water created a natural sound barrier, a simple but effective way to hide conversation from eavesdropping. I got up and casually approached her, like a random passerby. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, not turning her head. "In your place, I would have considered this a trap." "It is," I replied, sitting down next to her. "The question is just who said it and for whom." Alexis smiled weakly, not with her lips but with her eyes. "I always admired your suspicion. You never took anything on faith." She hesitated. "Even when I tried to tell you that I had feelings for you, you asked if I wanted something from you." I vaguely remembered that conversation. Foggy days after surgery, when pain mixed with morphine and reality with nightmares. "I was married," I simply replied. "That's exactly what you said then." There was bitterness in her voice. "I'm married and I love my wife." Such correctness, such loyalty. I knew you weren't the type to betray. I wanted to ask if she was deliberately emphasizing the word betray, considering Emily's recent departure, but there was no time for personal conversations. "Why do you work for Caldwell?" I asked directly. She took a deep breath. "After the Army, I was offered a job at Summit, officially as a medical expert, actually as an analyst. Good money, interesting tasks. I didn't ask questions until I gained access to the archive." She looked around and lowered her voice, leaning closer to the fountain. Operation Red Shield was staged by Gregory's people. Not just a terrorist act, a carefully planned kidnapping of an informant diplomat who had documents capable of destroying several governments, including ours. My heart skipped a beat. The school, the children, it was all a cover. She finished the sentence. Gregory needed the diplomat, but he couldn't just kidnap him. He needed a spectacle, hostage-taking, terrorist demands, a failed assault, and the tragic death of one specific person. "But I saved him," I said slowly, remembering the frightened face of the man found in the East Wing. "Returned, even though I was ordered to retreat, and saved exactly the one they planned to kill." Alexis nodded. "You accidentally saved not only the hostages, but also a witness who is now ready to testify against." I saw it before I heard it, the crimson dot of a laser sight on the center of her chest. Time seemed to stretch, like in a viscous nightmare, when you know what will happen but can't move quickly enough. "Get down," I shouted, lunging forward. The bullet beat me by a fraction of a second. It entered precisely into Alexis's heart, practically soundless, the work of a professional with a silencer. I managed to catch her falling body and drag it behind a sculpture next to the fountain. A second bullet chipped stone a few centimeters from my head. People around began to scream and scatter. I bent over Alexis, knowing the wound was fatal. She looked at me with wide-open eyes, life rapidly fading from them. Her lips moved, trying to pronounce her last words. "Did we ever have a chance?" The whisper was barely audible above the noise of the panicking crowd. "After your unfaithful woman." I didn't answer, partly because I didn't know the answer, partly because she no longer needed my words. Alexis's gaze became fixed, empty, and motionless. I closed her eyes and quickly searched her pockets, taking her phone and a small USB drive that she was clutching in her hand. A third bullet crumbled the marble side of the sculpture. The sniper was changing position, trying to get a clean shot. I mentally determined his location, a building on the opposite side of the park, probably the third or fourth floor, and slipped out of the shelter in the opposite direction, diving into the crowd of frightened park visitors. Emergency sirens were already wailing in the distance. I had about 3 minutes before the park would be flooded with police. By then, I needed to disappear, as would the shooter, who was undoubtedly already leaving his position. I cast a farewell glance at Alexis's body, spread out behind the fountain. She had died trying to tell me the truth. Now it was up to me to discover that truth myself. Return to an empty nest. I reached home, zigzagging through the city to shake off possible surveillance. I changed transportation several times, first a taxi, then the subway, another taxi, and finally walking the last few blocks. An old trick we were taught in special forces: never return home directly after an operation. A few hours of circling didn't guarantee safety, but gave a chance to detect a tail. When I finally reached the house through the back door, it was already past noon. Opening the door with my key, I immediately smelled smoke. Not a fire burning paper. A soft, almost intimate aroma of secrets being destroyed. Silently passing through the kitchen, I stopped in the doorway to the living room. Emily was kneeling in front of the fireplace. She was throwing documents from a stack lying nearby into the fire. At her feet was a half-packed suitcase, filled with clothes and several jewelry boxes. I watched as the flames devoured the paper. Familiar Summit Security logos flashed by, photographs of some people in military uniform, pages marked "Confidential." Emily acted methodically, as if performing a well-known task. I deliberately stepped on a creaky floorboard. Emily flinched and turned sharply, instinctively reaching for something in the pocket of her elegant jacket. When she saw me, her hand froze and a complex mixture of emotions crossed her face: surprise, fear, and relief. "Declan," she exhaled, "you're okay." It sounded not like a question but a statement, almost with a note of disappointment. "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, slowly entering the room and blocking the path to the exit. Which can't be said for Alexis Morgan. She was shot this morning, right before my eyes. Emily turned pale, but maintained her composure. "I'm sorry," she said in an even voice. "I didn't know her." "Not true." I pointed to the charred edge of a photograph burning in the fireplace. Alexis's face next to Gregory Caldwell could still be distinguished on it. "You knew her, and you knew she would contact me." Emily clutched the lighter in her hand so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She glanced at the remaining stack of documents, as if calculating whether she could burn them before I interfered. "What do you want to hear, Declan?" she asked quietly. "The truth," I answered, taking another step forward. "The whole truth, starting with when and why you began working for Caldwell." She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment as if gathering her thoughts. When she looked at me again, there was no trace of the woman who had been my wife for 15 years in her gaze. Before me was a professional coldly calculating options. "Gregory appeared in our lives about a year ago," she began. "He noticed me at a charity evening for veterans. He knew who I was, knew about your operation and the documents you keep in the safe." She rose from her knees, brushing off her skirt with a businesslike gesture. "At first, it was just a business proposal. Find and copy certain papers for generous compensation. $50,000, Declan. Do you know how many months I could have gone without worrying about bills for your medications and rehabilitation? So this is all for my sake." I didn't hide my sarcasm. Emily pursed her lips. "I agreed because your military pension barely covered our debts for treatment." She lowered her eyes. "And then it got more complicated. He knows how to make a woman feel significant, you understand. When I brought him documents, he looked at me as an equal, not as a caretaker to an invalid. Her voice became quieter, almost more intimate. I didn't plan to, but I really developed feelings for him. Do you know how many nights I spent listening to you scream in your sleep? I couldn't help you, couldn't reach you. And Gregory, he made me visible again. I tried to maintain an inscrutable expression, but something inside twisted into a tight knot. Not jealousy, something deeper and more painful. The realization of how blind I had been all these years. I saw the physical difficulties Emily dealt with, caring for me, but didn't notice her emotional exhaustion. And now he sent you to destroy the evidence, I said, nodding at the papers smoldering in the fireplace. Always two birds with one stone, right? Using you for access to classified materials and then for covering tracks. Emily took a step toward the suitcase. I was going to leave today, filed for divorce last night. She shifted her gaze to the fireplace. But then I heard the news. In Summit's closed channels, they reported the elimination of Problem M. I realized they meant that woman, Alexis, and that you're next. Unexpected requests. Emily approached the window and slightly pulled back the curtain, looking out at the street. Her profile against the daylight seemed fragile and unfamiliar. You won't believe it, but I was genuinely afraid something had happened to you, she said quietly. I know I have no right to your trust, but I don't want your death, Declan. Never wanted it. Something in her voice made me believe these words. Perhaps the same intuition that had saved my life in combat dozens of times. Or simply a desperate desire to find some sincerity in the person I had loved for half my life. I found something, Emily continued, moving away from the window. In Gregory's office on his personal computer, almost by accident. I wasn't supposed to have access to those files. She took folded sheets of paper from her jacket's inner pocket and handed them to me. I saw files and overheard conversations. The company has a list of expendable materials, people who know too much and must disappear after Operation Cleanup is completed. I'm on that list, Declan, and so are you. I unfolded the printout. It was an internal Summit security memorandum marked top secret. A list of names with dates next to each. Most names meant nothing to me, but some were vaguely familiar, officers who participated in Operation Red Shield. Next to Alexis Morgan's name was a red mark and today's date. My name was next on the list. When I discovered this, I realized I had become a problem, Emily continued. I know too much, saw too much, and now with the materials obtained and the auction conducted, I've become unnecessary. She sank onto the edge of the sofa, suddenly looking exhausted and aged. I understand if you hate me, if you want to turn Gregory in or just leave me here, but I'm asking you, help me get out of the country. I have means, fake documents, I can disappear. She looked at me through tears, and genuine supplication was evident in her eyes. I know you don't owe me anything after all I've done, but I also know you won't leave me to die, even if I deserve it. I looked at the woman who had betrayed me twice, first by agreeing to spy for Caldwell, then by abandoning our marriage vows. Part of me wanted to simply turn around and leave, abandoning her to the consequences of her own decisions. But another part, the one that still woke up in cold sweat from the screams of wounded comrades I couldn't save, knew I couldn't do that. Emily was right. I couldn't leave her to die, even after everything she had done. It was my personal cross, loyalty to the last breath, what made me a good soldier and perhaps a bad husband. I had just opened my mouth to answer when the silence was shattered by the sound of breaking glass. Attack on the refuge. The first shot broke the living room window. The second, a decorative vase a few centimeters from Emily's head. Instinct worked faster than thought. I lunged forward, knocking her off the sofa to the floor, covering her with my body. Pain flared anew in my back, as if someone had thrust a heated rod between my vertebrae, but adrenaline dulled it almost instantly. Get down and don't move, I ordered, rolling to the side and tipping over a heavy oak cabinet, creating an improvised shelter. Emily didn't panic, which surprised me. She quickly moved behind the barricade, pressing close to the floor like a professional. Her eyes were frightened but focused. I heard the front door breaking. Heavy footsteps in the hallway, at least 4 people in tactical boots. Professionals, not police. 2 quiet movements, precise gestures, minimal conversation. 4, I whispered to Emily. Heavy tactical gear, probably assault rifles. They'll clear the rooms one by one. I looked around for a weapon. The pistol was left in the car, a stupid mistake I wouldn't have made in my better days. Nothing suitable in the living room except the poker by the fireplace, too far away in open space. But in the kitchen, there was a set of knives. While I was calculating options, the first of the attackers appeared in the doorway. Black tactical suit, balaclava, automatic rifle. He moved professionally, keeping his firing sector and covering the entrance for the other team members. Emily unexpectedly reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a pistol, a compact Glock with a silencer. She passed it to me without words, simply placing it in my hand, as if it were the most natural gesture in the world. I didn't ask questions about where my wife had a weapon. Instead, I waited for the moment when the first attacker turned away, checking the left corner of the room, and took 2 quick shots. The first bullet pierced his knee, causing him to fall. The second entered precisely at the base of the skull as he was falling. The second attacker reacted instantly, firing a burst in our direction. Bullets embedded in the oak cabinet protecting us, knocking out splinters and creating a cloud of wood dust. I aimed through the gap between the cabinet and the wall and fired again, forcing him to retreat behind the door frame. "In the kitchen, there's a back way," I said quietly to Emily. "A trapdoor in the floor behind the pantry. It leads to an old cellar, and from there, a tunnel goes out to the drain pipe behind the house." At that moment, the third and fourth attackers burst into the room from 2 sides simultaneously. They acted in harmony, like a well-trained team. One threw a flashbang grenade, which exploded, filling the room with a blinding flash and deafening noise. I was ready for this and managed to close my eyes and ears. Emily, to my surprise, did the same, another sign of special training I hadn't suspected. As soon as the grenade went off, I rolled left and fired twice at the attacker on the right. He fell, but his partner managed to turn in my direction, raising his weapon. And then something happened that I never expected from her. Emily jumped out from behind the shelter and attacked the third assailant. She moved with the grace of a professional hand-to-hand fighter, delivering a quick strike to the throat, then a sweep, toppling the opponent onto his back. The finishing blow with her heel to the temple knocked him out instantly. "Basic agent training," she briefly explained, noticing my shocked look. "Gregory was my instructor." I didn't have time to respond. The second shooter, who had been hiding behind the door frame, opened a barrage of fire, forcing us to take cover behind the cabinet again. Bullets were piercing through the wood, and our protection was rapidly deteriorating. "To the kitchen," I commanded, "on the count of 3, 1, 2. On 3, we both dashed toward the kitchen door. I fired 2 blind shots just to make the shooter duck, buying us precious seconds. Emily moved with surprising speed and flexibility, diving behind the kitchen counter before me. In the kitchen, I grabbed a large butcher knife from a magnetic holder. The pistol was almost empty, and I had no spare magazine. Emily pointed to a small door in the far corner of the kitchen, the entrance to the pantry. We managed to reach it when the last attacker burst into the kitchen, letting loose a burst of automatic fire at the furniture. I pushed Emily into the pantry and turned, throwing the knife in one fluid motion. The blade entered the attacker's neck and he collapsed, choking on blood. In the pantry, Emily was already moving aside a rug, under which a metal trapdoor with a code lock was revealed. She quickly entered the combination, and the cover lifted, opening a dark passage downward. I installed it a month after returning from service, I explained, helping her descend into the darkness. An old habit of always having an escape route. And you never told me. Apparently, each of us really did have our secrets. I descended after her, carefully closing the hatch above my head. My back was burning with fire, but I didn't allow myself to slow down. We had a long way through the underground tunnel before we could catch our breath. Before this, I bent over the body of the last attacker and quickly searched his pockets, taking a Summit Security identification card, spare magazines, and most importantly, a tablet with active navigation. On the screen was a city map with marked points and an order to eliminate objects D and E, with the note confidential, destroy after execution and Gregory Caldwell's signature. Temporary shelter. 2 hours later, we sat in the half-light of an abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. It was the old hunting cabin of Mike Swenson, my fellow serviceman who died in that very Operation Red Shield. I knew about this place because Mike once mentioned it as a backup airfield in case everything goes to hell. I had never been here but kept the coordinates. The cabin stood in the forest, away from roads, overgrown and inconspicuous. Inside, it smelled of dampness and mustiness. No one had opened the windows for years. Cheap hunting trophies and old photographs of smiling men with rifles and caught fish hung on the walls. Mike among them, young, with a wild fire in his eyes, not suspecting that in a few years he would bleed out in my arms in distant Qatar. Emily sat on a sagging couch, wrapped in an old blanket we found in the closet. Despite her elegant suit and flawless makeup, she looked exhausted and vulnerable. In the light of the pocket flashlight I had set up on the table, her face seemed gaunt and pale. I studied the documents found on the attacker, trying to form a complete picture. The elimination order was laconic and merciless. Objects D and E are to be liquidated without witnesses. After execution, burn the house to destroy possible evidence. Transport the bodies to Site 7 for disposal. They wanted to kill us both, Emily said, watching me. It seems so. I set aside the documents. Caldwell is cleaning up traces. Everyone who knows about the real purpose of Operation Red Shield must disappear. Why now? Emily rubbed her temples. 5 years have passed. Why did he start this hunt specifically now? I pondered, reviewing the facts. That diplomat I saved. Perhaps he's decided to speak out, come out of hiding with evidence. And Caldwell is trying to discredit him in advance by destroying all witnesses and creating an alternative version of events. Emily nodded, accepting this logic. That's why he needed your medals and reputation. To present you as a mentally unstable veteran who disobeyed orders due to PTSD, not because he heard a call for help. In the uncertain light of the flashlight, she looked fragile and frightened, so unlike the woman who had coldly sold my medals at an auction just a day ago, and quite different from the one who had professionally knocked out an armed assailant with a single blow. "Why didn't you meet Alexis earlier?" she suddenly asked, raising her eyes. "She would never have betrayed you." The question caught me off guard. There was something intimate about it, almost jealous, but at the same time sincere. "We don't choose who we meet and when," I answered after a pause. "But we do choose who to trust and who to fight for." Emily lowered her eyes. "You fought for me all these years, even when you returned broken, even when I distanced myself, you fought to preserve our family." "And you didn't." She shook her head. "I fought against circumstances, against your injury, against our debts, but not for us. I long ago stopped believing we could be saved." There was a bitter truth in her words that I didn't want to acknowledge. We had long become strangers to each other, long before Caldwell's appearance. I had immersed myself in my pain and memories, she in resentment and disappointment. "Loyalty isn't measured by betrayal," I said quietly. "I didn't choose you because I thought you were flawless. I chose you because I believed we were fighting on the same side." Emily looked at me for a long time, and there was something like regret in her gaze. Perhaps we can still end up on the same side, Declan, at least in this final battle. In the ensuing silence, we both realized that, despite all the betrayals, an invisible connection remained between us, consisting of shared pain, lost opportunities, and perhaps a last hope for redemption. Infiltration plan. We spent the rest of the night developing a plan. On the tablet seized from the attacker was detailed information about Summit's security, building plans, guard shift schedules, access codes. Everything a team of professional killers needed to do their job, and everything that could now help us. The company headquarters was located in a 40-story skyscraper in the city center, a gleaming glass tower with a helipad on the roof and an impeccable reputation as an exemplary corporate citizen. In promotional brochures, Summit offered security and stability in an unstable world. In reality, as I now understood, they traded chaos under the guise of order. The archive should be here. Emily pointed to a diagram of the 38th floor. Secure data storage with restricted access. Even I, as a financial consultant, didn't have a pass to this area. She opened another file on the tablet, the air conditioning system schedule. But there's a loophole. See, the wing on the 35th floor is currently under renovation. The ventilation system serving the northern part of the building passes through a technical compartment. From there, you can reach the ventilation shafts leading to the 38th floor. I studied the diagram, noting potential problems. The shafts are narrow. Someone of my size will find it tight, and there are motion sensors and thermal scanners throughout the route, which are turned off for maintenance every Tuesday from 10 to 12 a.m. Emily opened another document. Tomorrow is Tuesday. I looked at her with involuntary respect. She really was good at analytics. Even if I infiltrate the archive, what exactly are we looking for? Everything related to Operation Red Shield. The files should be marked with a unique operation code, KSO-17, but we don't just need access to the data. Emily hesitated. We need a copy. She stood and went to the window, carefully pulling back the faded curtain. I'll help you enter the building. I still have access as a consultant. I can escort you under the guise of a technical specialist up to the 35th floor, but from there, you're on your own. I have a chance to clear my name by returning those documents, and you need evidence about Red Shield. Something in her voice made me wary. Too smooth, too convincing, like a rehearsed role. I moved closer to her. And then what? If we get these files, where do we go with them? Emily didn't look me in the eye. There's a journalist who will help us, an independent investigator with international connections. He can publish the materials in a way that they can't be suppressed. I didn't ask how she knew such a person. Too many surprises for one day. We continued discussing the details of the plan until dawn. The infiltration route, the data copying algorithm, evacuation paths. The plan was risky but feasible. If everything went as planned, by tomorrow evening, we would have evidence capable of destroying Caldwell and his empire of lies. Just before dawn, as we were preparing to move toward the city, I noticed Emily taking out a disposable phone and quickly typing a message. Her fingers moved with the professional speed of someone accustomed to encrypted communications. "Who are you writing to?" I asked suspiciously. She hid the phone unfazed. "Insurance, in case something happens to us." Something intangible flashed in her eyes, either fear or a sense of guilt. I wanted to ask more but restrained myself. Each of us has our secrets, and perhaps not all of them should be revealed. The sun was rising over the forest as we left the hunting cabin. Ahead was a day that could end in the triumph of justice or our deaths, and I still wasn't sure if Emily was truly on my side or just playing her own game in which I was merely a figure on the board, to be sacrificed at the right moment. But there was no choice. It was time to go to war, and I knew only one thing: If this was a trap, I wouldn't be the only one caught in it. Caldwell would pay for everything, for dead comrades, for the murdered Alexis, for 5 years of pain and lies, even if it was the last thing I did in my life. Chapter 3: Vertical of the Fall. Infiltration into the lair. The Summit Security Company skyscraper towered over the city like a monolith of glass and concrete, 40 stories of corporate power, crowned with a helipad. I observed the building from across the street, sitting in a cafe with cold coffee. The plumber's uniform made me practically invisible, just another faceless worker in the stream of office employees. "Are you ready? Guard shift in 5 minutes." Emily's voice in my earpiece sounded calm, as if this were about an everyday procedure, not infiltrating the headquarters of a mercenary company. She had been inside for half an hour, having registered at the reception as a financial consultant. In a business suit, with a confident smile and a tablet in hand, she looked part of that world where I was about to penetrate in the guise of a plumber, someone noticed only when a toilet gets clogged. "Ready," I replied, crossing the street with a toolbox in which, besides wrenches, were hidden electronic lock picks and miniature explosive devices. I walked through the main entrance, confidently nodding to security, and headed straight for the service elevators. Emily was waiting for me there, professionally distracted, reviewing something on her tablet. When the elevator doors closed, she attached an additional ID badge to my overalls. "Most people don't notice plumbers and janitors," I remarked, watching the flashing floor numbers. "We become invisible." 35th floor, north wing. Emily checked her tablet. "The workers left for lunch. You have about 20 minutes before they return." The elevator stopped, and the doors opened onto a floor draped in plastic sheeting. The smell of paint and construction dust betrayed genuine renovation, the only authentic detail in the false world of Summit Security. In the far corner, Emily pointed to a ventilation shaft behind a false panel. "Motion sensors are disabled for maintenance for another 17 minutes, she handed me a syringe. "Lidocaine with adrenaline, local anesthesia. It will block the pain for an hour, maximum an hour and a half." I nodded silently and rolled up my sleeve. The injection was sharp, but almost instantly I felt numbness spreading through my lumbar region, enveloping the damaged nerves in a saving fog. "You have 20 minutes until the guard shift," Emily reminded, helping me climb into the shaft. "Then I won't be able to keep the cameras in looped recording mode." Our gazes met for a second longer than necessary, and I saw something like repentance in her eyes, or another mask. I turned and began moving up the shaft, inch by inch. Thanks to the anesthesia, pain didn't pierce my spine with each movement, but I knew it was only lurking, ready to return with tripled force when the drug wore off. 3 floors up, then a sharp right turn and a technical lift for regulatory elevator servicing. On it, I was able to rise to the very top to the 38th floor, where the secured archive was located. Reaching the necessary ventilation grate and making sure the corridor was empty, I slipped outside and quickly covered the distance to the door marked J38. The electronic cracker from the toolbox handled the first level of security, and the door opened, revealing a room filled with server racks. In the center was a secured terminal with a dual biometric scanner. I connected the bypass device, as Emily had taught, and began waiting for the automatic hack to complete. The terminal unlocked and I quickly connected a flash drive, initiating a search for files with the key code KSO17, the secret designation for Operation Red Shield. The system returned hundreds of results and I started copying. The indicator on the screen showed progress, 10%, 15%, 20%. And then the siren wailed. Betrayal at height. The siren howled simultaneously with the security system activation. The doors locked and a metallic voice came from the speakers. "Security breach, Sector J38. Cage protocol activated." Transparent plexiglass barriers descended from the ceiling, completely trapping me inside the server room. On the terminal screen appeared an image from a camera in an adjacent room. Emily stood next to an alarm button, her hand still resting on the red switch. Beside her was Gregory Caldwell, his hand possessively on her shoulder. "Sorry, Declan," Emily said into the camera. "I had no choice. He knew about our plan from the beginning, either you or me, and I'm not ready to die." The betrayal wasn't a surprise, though it still hit me in the gut. I had expected this from the moment I noticed her secret message in the shelter. Another act in the spectacle of lies that had lasted for years. I quickly surveyed the room looking for an exit. Server racks, a ventilation grate too small, the plexiglass cage that had descended from the ceiling, and cameras everywhere, leaving no blind spots. Caldwell smiled into the camera with fake respect. "Captain Shaw, you've caused us a lot of trouble, but now this little unpleasantness will end." I looked at the terminal. Data copying continued despite the alarm. 68%, 69%. If only I could buy time. The storage door opened, and 4 guards in tactical gear entered with semi-automatic pistols. Caldwell followed, impeccable in his gray suit. Emily wasn't with them. Presumably, he had sent her away as a pawn who had fulfilled her function. "Raise the barrier," Caldwell commanded, and the plexiglass cage rose to the ceiling. "Captain Shaw won't do anything stupid. Right, Captain?" I stood motionless, assessing the situation. 4 armed men plus Caldwell. My chances were minimal, but there was no choice. I needed to buy time. "Where's Emily?" I asked, trying to distract their attention from the terminal, where copying had reached 84%. "Mrs. Shaw has fulfilled her part of the agreement," Caldwell replied. "As promised, I will provide her with a new identity and sufficient funds to start life anew. She earned it, with her loyalty. Not to you, of course." He took a step closer, examining me like a museum exhibit. "You want to know why we spent so many resources on your capture? Why we staged this whole game with the auction and your wife?" I remained silent, allowing him to talk. Each second of delay brought the copying closer to completion. "After all, you deserve the truth before we finish," Caldwell said, settling on the edge of the desk. "You're an unwitting participant in events whose scale you can't even imagine." Truth revealed. Caldwell gestured for the guards to move to the door, creating an illusion of a private conversation. His self-confidence was palpable. He saw in me not a threat, but a defeated opponent who could be allowed to know the truth before execution. "I hope you understand that we couldn't let you gain access to our servers, Captain Shaw," he began. "Too much inconvenient information." He approached closer to the plexiglass cage, in which I had been a minute ago. "You know what's most ironic about your story? You became a hero by pure chance." Caldwell took a tablet from the terminal and opened a file marked Secret. On the screen appeared a map of the school in Qatar, the very one where 5 of my men died. "Operation Red Shield was carefully planned by my company," he continued, enlarging a certain section of the map. "A staged terrorist act to eliminate one specific person who knew too much. Hostage-taking, terrorist demands, a dramatic rescue attempt, and, unfortunately, the tragic death of our target in the chaos of the operation." He showed a photograph of a man in a suit, the diplomat I had rescued from the east wing of the school. "But you, following some ridiculous code of honor, against direct orders returned to the east wing for the last hostage, and saved exactly the one we planned to eliminate." The data copying reached 95%, but I couldn't even glance in that direction. Instead, I concentrated on Caldwell's words, gathering information that might help. "Seizing a school with children to eliminate one person," I said slowly. "You really consider this justified?" Caldwell shrugged. "High politics requires compromises, Captain. This man possessed information capable of destabilizing entire regions, and he needed to be killed accidentally, not deliberately." He turned on a projector, and a photograph appeared on the wall. The diplomat I had saved and documents marked strictly confidential. This man has been hiding under the protection of international organizations since then, Caldwell frowned. And now, 5 years later, he's ready to testify against my company. But his testimony will be convincing only under one condition. If the national hero who saved him confirms the authenticity of his story. I finished the sentence. Exactly, Caldwell smiled. But what if this hero confesses on camera to something discrediting this diplomat? The specifics will suggest to you. I remained silent, watching as the copying indicator reached 98%. Such confessions aren't particularly convincing if made under duress, I observed. Caldwell laughed. Oh, we're not barbarians, Captain. No crude coercion. We'll offer you a deal, your confession in exchange for Emily's life and well-being. She may have betrayed you, but you still have feelings for her, don't you? His eyes narrowed, studying my reaction. Or perhaps you're more concerned about the fate of Alexis Morgan's brother. Wonderful man, helps people like you at a rehabilitation center. It would be a tragedy if something happened to him. The threat was effective. Copying reached 100%, but the flash drive was still in the terminal. I needed to distract him for a few more seconds. And then what? I asked. After my confession, you'll let me go. Of course not, Caldwell smirked. But you'll die knowing you saved people dear to you. Isn't that the main thing for someone of your kind? Self-sacrifice, nobility, all those ideals they stuff military men with. He lowered his voice to a whisper. All this talk about duty and honor, just a way to make people like you die for people like me. The system works perfectly. You risk your life, we make a profit. And in the end, even your heroism becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold, like at that auction your wife arranged. I noticed one of the guards tensing, preparing for action. Time was running out. So you're offering me a choice, I summarized. Either I make a confession and die, saving others, or I refuse and you kill everyone, including me. A perfect choice for a hero, isn't it? Caldwell smiled. I'll even let you talk to Emily before making your decision. She's waiting in the conference room on this floor. He nodded to a guard who said something into a radio. The copying was complete, the flash drive still in the terminal. By the way, added Caldwell, don't waste time thinking about how to extract the data. The information is encrypted. Without a special key, which only I have, it's just a set of meaningless symbols. He was so confident in his victory that he didn't remove the flash drive from the terminal. But he didn't know that on my tactical vest was hidden a miniature decoder, a military intelligence device for breaking encryption systems. Fine, I pretended to surrender. I want to talk to Emily, then we'll decide about your offer. Caldwell smiled with the smugness of a man, accustomed to getting what he wants. A reasonable choice, Captain. The guards will escort you. Battle in the heavens. 2 guards led me down the corridor, keeping me at gunpoint. The third and fourth remained with Caldwell. I walked between them, feigning submission. The anesthesia was beginning to wear off, and each step resonated with dull pain. We turned a corner, heading toward the conference room where Emily supposedly waited. I needed to free myself, return for the flash drive, and find a way out of the building. An almost impossible task. Stop, I unexpectedly stumbled, clutching my lower back. I need a minute, my back. The guards exchanged glances. I carefully studied their faces. The first, dark-skinned, with a short haircut and a scar across his brow, carried himself with military bearing. The second, young, reddish, with a tattoo on his neck, seemed more nervous. Come on, move, the dark-skinned one said roughly, pushing my shoulder, but I noticed something strange in his eyes. Recognition, doubt. I decided to risk it. You guys military, where did you serve? Shut up and walk, the redhead commanded, but the dark-skinned man frowned. Marines, 3rd Battalion, he unexpectedly replied. Captain Rodriguez, are you really Declan Shaw, commander of the Red Shield Group? I slowly nodded. I served with Mike Swenson, Rodriguez continued more quietly. He talked about you, about how you pulled guys out of the worst situations despite orders. Something changed in his look. He glanced at his partner, then back at me. We thought we were working for a normal company, he said almost in a whisper. Security, cargo escort, and then people started disappearing. Former operatives, witnesses, and Caldwell's talk about necessary sacrifices. Drop it, Diego, the redhead responded nervously. You're talking too much. No, Kevin, Rodriguez shook his head. I've been silent too long. This man is a hero, and if Caldwell really staged a terrorist attack in which children died, I didn't miss the opportunity. He just confessed this to me. You and I know the price of each saved life, and each lost one. Do you really want to protect someone who trades in the deaths of innocents? Rodriguez looked me in the eyes for a long time, then slowly lowered his weapon. His partner hesitated for a second but followed his example. I knew something was wrong, said Rodriguez, but I didn't think it was all so. He fell silent at a loss for words. We're finished, Kevin noted nervously, if Caldwell finds out. And if he doesn't, I seized the initiative. I have evidence on a flash drive in the server room. Caldwell must answer for his crimes. Rodriguez made his decision. First for the flash drive, he said, handing me his pistol. Then we'll get you out of here. Kevin, maintain communication with Caldwell. Tell him everything's going according to plan. We headed back to the server room. Each step caused pain. The effect of the anesthesia was almost gone. But now I had a weapon and unexpected allies. We had almost reached the server room when a general alarm sounded. The sharp wail of sirens and flashing emergency lights filled the corridor. A metallic voice came from the speakers. Attention all personnel. Red code. Repeat, red code. Everyone evacuate the building immediately. Fire alarm, Rodriguez frowned. But why? I didn't have time to answer. From around the corner appeared Emily, running at a panic-stricken speed. Declan, she almost fell into my arms. Thank God you're alive. Caldwell found out I tried to warn you. He ordered both of us liquidated. Her hair was disheveled, a bruise forming on her cheekbone. Where's Caldwell? I asked, trying to determine if she was playing another role or genuinely in danger. On the roof, she gasped. Called a helicopter. He's taking all the data on Red Shield, if he flies away. I nodded to Rodriguez. I need to get to the roof. He mustn't escape. Elevators are locked during a fire alarm, said Kevin. Only the emergency stairwell. Give me your pass, I turned to Rodriguez. And go for the flash drive, it's still in the terminal. Meet downstairs. He nodded, extending his key card. Good luck, Captain. Emily and I rushed to the emergency stairwell. 40 floors up seemed an impossible test with my back, but adrenaline worked wonders. After agonizing minutes, we reached the door to the roof. The roar of helicopter blades came from outside. Caldwell was about to fly away, taking with him all evidence and the possibility of bringing him to justice. Emily looked at me with concern. I'm coming with you, she said decisively. I didn't argue. Together we stepped onto the roof, exposed to all winds. Sacrifice of redemption. The helicopter was already on the landing pad, its rotors spinning, creating a powerful air current. Caldwell and 2 guards were loading metal containers with documents into it. Pouring rain and gusty wind made the work difficult, but they were almost finished. Emily and I pressed against the wall of the technical block, remaining unnoticed. Do you have a plan? She asked, shouting over the noise of the rotors and rain. Improvisation, I replied, peering at the forces arrayed. 2 guards, Caldwell, a pilot in the cabin, out of range for my pistol from our current position. Caldwell boarded the helicopter. One of the guards was checking something in documents. The second stood on guard, peering at the opposite side of the roof from us. "We need to reach the helicopter before they take off," I said. "I'll take the guard on the right, you distract the second." Emily suddenly grabbed my arm. "Declan, if we don't get out of here," her voice trembled, "I want you to know I really did love you. I just got lost somewhere along the way." There was genuine remorse in her eyes. I squeezed her hand in response. "We'll talk later, now focus on the task." We separated. I moved along the wall, holding the pistol ready. The distance was sufficient for an accurate shot, but the rain and wind complicated the situation. I aimed at the guard, but at that moment, Emily darted from cover and ran straight toward the helicopter, shouting and waving her arms. Both guards turned toward her, raising their weapons. I had less than a second to decide. I fired twice, hitting the nearest guard in the back. The second managed to take cover behind a container, returning fire. Caldwell, hearing the gunfire, leaned out of the helicopter with a pistol in hand. Seeing Emily, he smiled with cold cruelty and took aim. I burst out of cover, shooting on the run. One of my bullets grazed Caldwell's shoulder, and he recoiled backward into the helicopter. The second guard opened a barrage of fire, forcing me to dive behind a pile of containers. Emily took advantage of the confusion and dashed to the helicopter. I didn't understand her intentions until I saw her snatching some folders from the cabin, documents Caldwell was trying to take away. But she miscalculated. Caldwell, overcoming the pain from his wound, grabbed her by the hair and put a pistol to her temple. "Drop your weapon, Captain," he shouted over the rotor noise, "or your wife dies before your eyes." I froze, calculating options. The distance was too great for an accurate shot without risking hitting Emily. "Don't listen to him," Emily shouted. "He'll kill us both anyway." Caldwell yanked her hair harder, eliciting a groan of pain. "5 seconds, Captain. 5, 4. I slowly placed the pistol on the ground and raised my hands. Caldwell grinned. "Your sentimentality is predictable," he said, signaling to the remaining guard. "Finish him." The guard raised his automatic weapon, but before he could fire, lightning tore through the sky, momentarily blinding us all, and a deafening thunderclap resounded. In this moment, Emily, taking advantage of Caldwell's momentarily slackened grip, sharply elbowed him in the solar plexus. He doubled over but didn't drop his weapon. Instead, Caldwell pushed her away and pulled a grenade from his pocket. "If I'm finished, you're going with me," he yelled, pulling the pin. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the metal ball in his hand, saw the malicious triumph in his eyes, saw how raindrops, illuminated by a lightning flash, hung suspended in the air. I lunged forward but knew I wouldn't make it. At this moment, Emily did something I never expected from her. She rushed at Caldwell, grabbing his hands with the grenade. "Declan, run!" Her cry cut through the storm noise as she pushed me aside. The explosion thundered almost simultaneously with the lightning. The blast waved through me toward the edge of the roof, while Caldwell and Emily were hurled in the opposite direction. The remaining guard was disoriented by the explosion. When I rose, holding onto the railing, he slowly lowered his weapon. I recognized him as Brian Miller from Texas, a former Army sapper. We had crossed paths in several international operations. "Seems I chose the wrong side," he said, looking at Caldwell's body, half hanging over the edge of the roof. "It's not too late to make the right choice," I replied, barely staying on my feet. Miller nodded and tossed his automatic weapon aside. "Get out of here," he said. "I'll say you died with Caldwell in the explosion. The documents will confirm it." His gaze was that of a man who realized he had served the wrong ideals. I thanked him with a nod and, overcoming the pain, rushed to where Emily had fallen. She lay by a ventilation shaft, her body broken by the blast wave. Her light suit was soaked with blood. Her face bore an expression of determination and strange peace. I knelt beside her, checking her pulse, weak but stable. She was alive, though clearly in need of urgent medical attention. Declan, her voice was barely audible through the rain noise. Flash drive. With Rodriguez, trust him. Her hand weakly squeezed mine. I wanted to fix everything. Each word cost her enormous effort. Forgive for everything. I held her to me, feeling life slowly leaving her body. You did fix it, I whispered. In the end, you made the right choice. A faint smile touched her lips, her eyes closed. Emily lost consciousness, but her breathing, though weak, continued. She needed to be taken to a hospital immediately. Miller approached me. Go, he said insistently. Soon the company's operational team will be here. I'll take care of her, say she tried to stop you. They'll take her to a hospital, but you can't stay. I knew he was right. With the evidence on the flash drive, I could much more effectively protect both myself and Emily. Take care of her, I said, rising. She deserves a second chance. Miller nodded, with the solemnity of a man making an oath. I give you my word as a Marine. That was all I needed to hear. The bitterness of victory and its price. Descending from the skyscraper became a real ordeal. My body, exhausted by pain and the adrenaline crash, barely obeyed. The anesthesia had long ceased to work, and each step down the stairs resonated with agony. I avoided elevators and main corridors, making my way down service stairs. After an agonizing 20 minutes, I met Rodriguez at the auxiliary exit of the first floor. Here, he handed me the flash drive. All the data on Red Shield and other operations. Caldwell is dead, I said, hiding the flash drive in an inner pocket. Emily is severely wounded but alive. Rodriguez nodded. Right now, the most important thing is to get you out of here. I have a car in the underground parking lot. We passed through technical rooms to a service elevator leading to the parking garage. 10 minutes later, we were driving away from the building in an inconspicuous sedan. Where to? Asked Rodriguez, skillfully maneuvering through the flow of cars. Mike Swenson's hunting cabin, I replied, fighting pain and fatigue. I need to hide the flash drive. Rodriguez nodded and directed the car toward the outskirts of the city. I felt my strength ebbing with each minute. Blood loss, overexertion, injuries, all were taking their toll. Hang in there, Captain. Rodriguez noticed my condition. We'll be there soon. We reached the cabin already at dusk. The rain had subsided, leaving behind moist coolness and the scent of freshness. My movements were becoming increasingly uncertain. Black spots danced before my eyes. Under the floorboard, in the main room, I mumbled, pointing to the hiding place. Hide it there. Rodriguez helped me enter and carefully seated me on the couch. Then he found the floorboard with the hiding place and concealed the flash drive. What next? He asked, returning to me with a first aid kit found in the cabinet. Next, take me to a hospital, leave me there, and you leave, I said, struggling to focus my gaze. This information is now your responsibility. Find my friend Mike Donaldson from the Pentagon's analytical department. Tell him I found evidence on Red Shield. He'll understand. Rodriguez reluctantly agreed. I'll find Donaldson, and I'll come back for you. How long I remained in a semi-conscious state, I didn't know. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the hospital porch, instinctively reached for a weapon but couldn't even raise my arm. Above me stood police officers, 2 in uniform and 1 in plainclothes. Declan Shaw, asked the man in the suit, showing a badge. Detective Marcus Foster, you're under arrest on suspicion of murder and terrorism. I didn't resist when handcuffs were placed on my wrists. I simply had no strength. The helicopter for transport will arrive in 5 minutes, one of the police officers said on the radio. Subject found, condition stable. The last thing I remember before sinking into darkness was the thought about the flash drive under the floorboard. It was safe, out of reach for those who might search for it on me. I regained consciousness in a hospital, chained to the bed. An elderly doctor with tired eyes was checking my pupils. "You're lucky, Mr. Shaw," he said. "Multiple bruises, concussion, exacerbation of an old spinal injury. A little more and neurosurgical intervention would have been unavoidable." "Where am I?" I asked, trying to look around. "In the prison wing of the city hospital," the doctor replied. "There behind the door stands security. Police, federal agents, other people in suits. Everyone wants to talk to you." He leaned closer. "I was a military doctor in Iraq. Saw guys like you. Whatever you did, I don't think you deserve such treatment. So I insisted on 24 hours of rest after examination." The next day, I was transferred to the prison hospital. The accusation sounded surreal: terrorism, assault on corporate guards, infiltration of a server room with intent to sabotage. Summit Security released a press statement presenting me as a mentally unstable veteran who staged an explosion due to PTSD. According to their version, Caldwell heroically tried to stop me and died on the roof. There was not a word about Emily in the release. The court-appointed lawyer was a young man with frightened eyes. "Listen, Mr. Shaw," he nervously shuffled papers. "The evidence against you is irrefutable. The best I can offer is a deal. You plead guilty, and the prosecutor agrees to psychiatric treatment instead of life imprisonment." I remained silent, staring at the ceiling. The flash drive was safe. Rodriguez should have already contacted Mike. All that remained was to wait. The cell door opened, and another person entered, in an impeccable suit with confident movements. "Leave us," he said to the lawyer, showing identification. The new visitor silently surveyed the cell, then placed a small envelope on the bed. "You have 5 minutes to read," he said, "then I'll take it back." I opened the envelope. Inside was Alexis's military tag and a note. "We took the flash drive from your hiding place. The truth will come out. Hold on. M. Mike Donaldson, my Army friend from the analytical department." "I know nothing," said the visitor, taking back the note. "I'm just carrying out an errand, as you once did." With these words he left, leaving me with the first spark of hope. My case turned into a media circus. I became simultaneously a terrorist and a tragic figure, a war hero broken by trauma. No one mentioned the real background of the events. And then something unexpected happened. On the day of the trial, the hall filled with people in military uniform, dozens of veterans, many on crutches or in wheelchairs. My former fellow servicemen, including the surviving members of the Red Shield group. The judge surveyed the unusual audience but remained silent. The prosecutor began reading the charges with the air of a man for whom the outcome was already decided. And at this moment the doors of the hall swung open. A man in a diplomatic suit entered, accompanied by security guards. His face was familiar to me. I had seen him 5 years ago in the east wing of the school. "Your Honor," he said in a loud voice, "I am Aaron Madsen, Deputy Secretary General of the UN for Special Issues, and I demand the immediate cessation of this farce you call a trial." He handed the judge a thick folder of documents. "Here is a complete dossier on the company Summit Security and its operations, including the seizure of the school in Qatar. Also here is evidence that the accused Declan Shaw is not a criminal, but a victim of a conspiracy to cover up war crimes." The judge slowly reviewed the documents, her face becoming increasingly serious. "These documents are confirmed by the International Court and Intelligence Services of 3 countries," Madsen continued. "They prove that the company organized a terrorist attack to eliminate me as a witness to their illegal operations. Captain Shaw saved me against orders, and for that, they tried to destroy him. I looked at the man who was saving me just as I had once saved him. The circle was complete. The trial was postponed to study the new evidence. I was released on bail. Summit Security found itself at the center of an international scandal, its assets being frozen. The truth had finally come out, but the price had been immeasurably high. A month after the final acquittal, I received news that Emily had come out of a coma. Her condition had stabilized, but a long rehabilitation lay ahead. I stood in the hospital corridor, hesitating to enter the room. A nurse, noticing my hesitation, gently said, "She asks about you every day, says she has much to explain." I nodded and finally crossed the threshold. Emily lay under white sheets, pale and gaunt. When she saw me, fear and hope simultaneously flashed in her eyes. "You came," her voice was weak but clear. "I came," I sat on a chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone given a second chance they don't deserve," she smiled weakly. "Doctors say I'll recover, but it will take time." A pause hung between us, filled with unspoken words and feelings. "I'm so sorry, Declan," she finally said. "For everything, for the betrayal, for the pain I caused." "You saved my life on that roof," I replied. "That means something." "Not enough to atone for everything else," she shook her head. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want you to know, in the end, I understood who I am and what choice I should make." I looked at the woman with whom I had lived for 15 years. The woman who had betrayed me, then risked her life to save me. I felt neither hatred nor love, only the weariness and strange calm of a person who had passed through a storm. "The divorce papers are signed," I said, "but I'll make sure you have everything necessary for treatment." "Thank you," her eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve even that." As I was leaving the room, she called after me. "Alexis," her voice faltered. "She really loved you, and she would never have betrayed you as I did." I silently nodded and closed the door behind me. At the exit from the hospital, a young man was waiting for me, outwardly resembling Alexis. The same penetrating eyes, the same expression of determination. "James Morgan," he introduced himself. "Alexis's brother. She wrote a lot about you in her letters." I shook his hand, not knowing what to say. "They said you'd be looking for a new job," he continued. "We're building a rehabilitation center for veterans. We need someone who understands what they've been through and how to find the way back." I looked at this man, offering me a new beginning amid the ruins. "I don't know if I'm ready," I honestly replied. James smiled, with the same calm smile I remembered from his sister. "None of us is ready for what life brings," he said. "We just take the next step, and another, until we find our way home." The rain intensified, washing away dust from the sidewalks and carrying away a particle of the pain I had carried within me for years. Perhaps true healing begins when we use our own scars to help others heal their wounds. "When do I start?" I asked, accepting his offer and the chance for a new life amid the debris of the old. If you enjoyed this story, please support the author with a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your emotions in the comments. Thank you.